Thanks, Kim. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll be discussing CMMC updates to the timeline and to the standard itself. My name is Ken Chikanovich with Summit Business Technologies. We are a managed service security provider based out of Millersville, Maryland, and we're supporting the defense industrial base with their CMMC needs, including readiness assessments and remediation of any gaps found. With us today is Melinda Wood with Project Spectrum. Melinda is currently the Director of Industry, Innovation, and Analysis for Echelon. Did I pronounce that properly? Fantastic. So she directly oversees several contracting efforts in support of the U.S. Department of Defense program, including the MPP, the Mentor Protege Program, and the Project Spectrum Cybersecurity Outreach Initiative. She utilizes her extensive experience with national security technology and policy strategy to direct cybersecurity compliance, supply chain analysis, government grants and contracts, technology development and integration, foreign investment oversight, mitigation and monitoring, and program support. So obviously she has a very extensive background in this sphere, and she is one of the big proponents of the CMMC program. So previously, Ms. Woods served at the Office of the Secretary of Defense Industrial Policy as a principal advisor on strategy and integration. So I do want to thank her for joining us today. As I mentioned, we'll be discussing some of the updates that have come out recently and also historically with the CMMC standard itself, as we've shifted from 1.0 to 2.0, and we've seen a couple other changes come in place to the timeline. We thought it was a great idea to have this conversation. So Melinda, if you can kind of give us a little bit more background as to Echelon and also Project Spectrum, that'd be great. And then we can kind of talk about some of these updates.
Awesome. Sounds perfect. Thank you for having us today. I am going to get a little bit more into Project Spectrum as we talk through what the DoD is doing. But essentially, let's just say that Project Spectrum is here absolutely commissioned by the Department of Defense to support the defense industrial base, and particularly small and medium-sized businesses, academia, and those who might have constrained or restricted budget to do some of the preparation and readiness and hygienic activities that is needed. And of course, those who we also know are the bread and butter of the industrial base. So that means those who a lot of the large businesses depend on for innovation, for capabilities, but who might be a step or two or three or four in the supply chain removed from the day-to-day interaction that large businesses are having with the DoD, and getting that kind of insight and getting that, in some cases, getting even the direct assistance. So there are efforts in place like Project Spectrum to provide direct assistance, guidance, and what we're doing today, that kind of policy update and policy interpretation, even for those who might not be as closely tied to the direct DoD requirement and or day-to-day interfacing. Project Spectrum is doing education, putting out tool reviews. So places like the Summit Business Technologies and their service offerings, helping to put the word out, right, about those services that are available, and definitely breaking down the policy that comes out, partnering across the government. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But a big part of what we do is what I'm going to do today, which is interpret and bring out the latest and greatest, because we are tied very closely to the policymakers for what's coming down the pipe.
Great, excellent. Well, I guess with that being said, I'd love if you could walk us through, kind of where CMMC stands as of right now, and how that timeline has changed. I know, it started January of 2020 with 1.0 being released, and then there have been updates throughout 2020, 2021, and now into 2022.
Absolutely. So the interesting or kind of unique vantage point I have as a person who worked on the Deputy Secretary of Defense Task Force called Protecting Critical Technologies Task Force that essentially created things like the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, or DIPCAC, that's in the DCMA, that's a big part of the assessments, essentially created the CMMC for the folks who stood that up and debated and argued about what needed to happen regarding third-party assessments. Is what I fundamentally always like to bring to the table is why we are here and then how we got here. Then it all makes sense. So we're here because for a very long time, essentially the large big businesses and DoD had an ongoing discussion / debate with the department about who's responsible for securing the networks, kind of the cybersecurity environment below the supply chain. It was really less about the direct primes because of the way contracting works. So the contracting says in the government that the primes are responsible, right, for it. And the primes said, well, we're not responsible because we don't know who's down below us a lot of times. And so there was an assessment, a set of assessments done by the Defense Contracting Management Agency, or DCMA, of the large defense contractors. And of course, they employ big, expensive managed security service providers a lot of times. They have their own in-house a lot of times. And so there was a good long effort actually to kind of assess where they are standing and, you know, mixed bag, right? But they have the resources to address those things. But there really wasn't a good way to assess and understand what was happening beneath in the lower tiers of the supply chain. So with the suppliers of the large defense contractors. And so there was an effort set up to try to get to some of that. Before there was ever a CMMC, there was a evaluation of who was addressing the DFARS clause that are already required for companies to address the NIST 800-171, safeguarding their CUI materials. That's always been there, right? It's been there for many years. And there was an effort to say, hey, maybe we want to switch that out to a more strenuous update that was coming out of NIST. So that at that time it was called Rev 2. And now we know that as 172, so NIST 800-172. And essentially what was decided upon is this maturity model made the most sense, meaning that companies that had less of a risk, less of a vulnerability risk. So let's think about risk related to the accesses that you have to the department, the information you have for the department, and the vulnerability you have in your systems could be have the basic foundational amount of security, and then that could go up in maturity model depending on where a company set in the supply chain and their accesses and their network kind of development in maturity. And so that was the approach, and the CMMC was born, the cybersecurity maturity model. And there was a big effort there to build the model out. And essentially in November 2020, there was this process that is repeating itself. History is repeating itself right now. That is required for any actual regulation to go into place, which is called rulemaking, literally. And so that, of course, involves the Federal Register. It involves offices in the White House, actually. So the department has to submit requests to make a rule, a new rule. And there is a provision that allows for an interim rule to go in place. So in November 2020, the interim rule for the original CMMC that came out of that whole process I just talked about went into place. So the DoD had gotten approval to essentially have the 60-day comment period. And after the 60-day comment period, but before completion of adjudication of those comments, to put the rule in place. So that was November 2020. And I'm going to just share screen here as I walk through some resources to kind of put you kind of level set or contextualize. Okay. All right. So Project Spectrum has been following this the whole time. And so there's material that kind of helps you understand historically and then gets you to where we are. So there's a blog on Project Spectrum called The Cost to be CMMC Certified from October 2020. And so we were in this place where the DoD is going to make this thing called CMMC official, right? There was a lot of discussion around what do we need to do? How do we need to do it? But it's going to come up again here as we talk through where we are. There was not a lot of guidance out. There was not a lot of guidance as to how am I going to get assessed? Who is going to do the assessors? Of course, there were no assessors back then.
Right.
None, right?
Okay.
But there was this publishing of this 3-part rule. And so there's a blog from way back then that talks about that. The part that I want to emphasize is the same process is underway now, because what happened then last year, of course, November, so almost a year later, right? The department launched a 2.0. Essentially, of course, there was a review. There was a lot of, there were concerns raised about the impact of small business, for example, cost, the ability to assign kind of responsibility and liability if things were found during an assessment. There were various different concerns that were brought up, and the department reevaluated kind of what was there. And so on November 4th, 2021, the department launched 2.0 model. And of course, the 2.0 model reduced the 5 levels to 3, essentially kind of condensed those and brought back the fundamental thing that had been really, under question, which is how good is self-assessment. So before there was ever a CMMC, like I talked about, the department was grappling with the DFAR rule that allowed for a plan of action and milestone, or POAM, to be put in place, but there had been no real follow-up to see if those POAMs were followed up upon. So we now see in 2.0, you can still do a self-assessment. Okay. There are some provisions that allow for a POAM, or plan of action and milestone, but then there are timelines on that to essentially put in those hooks that had not been there, to allow for the department to make sure it's going back and making sure people are implementing the things that they find when they go through their assessment and they have the plan to address. So fundamentally, a year later, the department said, okay, we'll take a look, we'll simplify. And now what that means, those changes, so there's changes to the Federal Register, and there are multiple different places, and you see some of the bullets here. And full disclosure, I am using almost all material from publicly released information from the government. Great. Related. So this is a slide that has been presented multiple times in various forms from the DoD. And so you see here the reference to Title 32 and Title 48 of the CFR. Suffice it to say, the same process needs to be gone through to change the model and to change the implementation. And that is where we are today. Today, and this is a slide that I stole, that I like because of the colors and the kind of layout from I participated actually in a GovExec webinar, and it was actually Matt Travis, who's the CEO of the Cyber AB, or accreditation body, who presented this slide. So essentially where we are today, it almost looks a lot like what happened 2020 November. There was an advance notice of proposed rulemaking November 2021, at the same time, of course, as the public learned of the change to 2.0. We're right now, in this space that we're in a place where DoD has submitted for approval, not yet got it, but submitted for approval to enter into the rulemaking process. So that is going to take some time as well. So they're going back and forth right now with the authorities related to rulemaking. Okay. And their plan, though, is to do the same thing they did in 2020, which is to, in April 2023, to open up the public comment period, which is, of course, required by law for a change like this. And then 60 days later, which is the May 2023 date, to initiate or to put into place the interim final rule. That's the plan. So that's where the May 2023 comes from. And I got the confirmation from the folks who are literally doing this, the senior executives at the highest levels just yesterday, if they don't get that approval, the anticipation is that they will go through the regular process, right? So they won't have the interim rule go into effect in May 2023. They will go through the adjudication process, which can take up to a year or a year and a half. And they're anticipating the following year, May, without that approval. But in either of those cases, there have been processes put in place so people can start now, which I know is of interest for you guys as well.
Absolutely. I know that I've been hearing some things about voluntary assessment starting here shortly, and things moving forward, DIBCAC assessments, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later on. So that timeline for the interim rule, that's been moved up from where it was originally. Can you give any insight into why it got moved up and the importance of that?
Yeah, I don't have any specific insight, but what I will say is that there's always benefits to having clarity to what the law is saying has to be done. So the longer time that you have essentially kind of a no man's land, which is what happened, right? In November 2021, it was, hey, the standard has changed and we're no longer piloting what we've been piloting, and stay tuned. Is a longer opportunity for both companies to be confused, companies to kind of rest on their laurels and their heels and not put in place what we know is necessary just to protect national security, right? That's what this was about. And for adversaries, right, to take advantage of us during that time. So it is always of utmost importance to provide clarity, right? Especially when you've kind of gone halfway out the gate. And so, yes, I am sure that I can be correct in saying a part of that moving up is, okay, we're ready now to at least move toward the rulemaking process to put something in place where people can understand here's what the regulation says.
Right. So,
yeah.
And that's always helpful. Obviously, the more confusion is out there, the more, rumors get started and people start saying, oh, we're stalling. And so this is never going to happen. We're just going to keep kicking that can down the road. So moving it forward kind of puts it in place of, this is indeed happening and we're so sure it's happening, we're actually going to move up that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other avenues, or at least details, that says nope, this is definitely happening, is this item called the cap. I'm sure everyone here who's been a part of the CMMC landscape has probably seen something about the cap has been released. They're doing a public comment review session about the cap. And for those of you who aren't aware, CAP stands for the CMMC assessment program or procedure. It's the, guidelines for the assessors to on how they need to handle the actual official assessments going forward. So can you dive into a little bit about that and what we're seeing with the CAP itself and, in its first initial draft that's been released?
Absolutely. So you nailed it. And I alluded to this, right? So CMMC came out November 2020 and times before, and there were these roles, right, that were introduced. So whether it was registered practitioner organization, RPO, of course, third party assessor organization, C3PAO, and others, right? There was the training professionals, LPPs, all introduced by then, of course, the CMMC or accreditation body, but nobody really had specific guidance to what they were going to do explicitly, nor was there essentially training available on how to do an assessment, nor was there clarity around how that assessment would be similar, different to other things that were already going on, like the DIB-CAC industry assessments. And so this is the first kind of seminal piece that goes into great detail about the roles. It lists them out explicitly, what those folks will be doing and how the assessment will be executed. So that's pretty important because we didn't have that up until this point. And so it's great that there is a public comments period, and encourage folks to kind of look at that and to chime in. Those comments are being taken very seriously as a part of the review of CMMC. And kind of the sensitivity that the Office of Secretary of Defense Industrial Policy, and particularly Office of Small Business Policy, has to the impact that these assessments may have on the businesses, bottom line, but of course being still very fervent in insisting, right, that security posture be what it needs to be to protect the companies who essentially make up our national security, whether they understand it or not. That's still definitely the case, but making sure that there's not any undue burden, that there are potential avenues of assistance, help, and even in some cases, um, um, support that ends up supplanting some of the financial obligations for small businesses. That all gets assessed when you put in your public comments. So take a look at the document. I'm going to share screen one more time here and note a blog on the Project Spectrum site. So this was issued August 11th, right when the CAP, the cyber AV released the assessment process. And it is essentially says everything we just said, right? Understand that it's a pre-decisional draft, so there's still opportunity for things to change in it. And of course, the comment period ends, looks like today. So get your comments in and send them there to the CAP comments at cyberab.org. And this blog does go through kind of just a quick summary of what's in the CAP. Why is it important to you? So I encourage you to kind of visit there. But one of the things I wanted to point out is this second line here in our introduction in this blog. Second paragraph, second line, the first voluntary CMMC assessment will be conducted by DoD's Joint Surveillance Program starting on August 22nd, which is 3 days ago.
Oh, wow. So we're already in that voluntary period.
Yeah, these where you can use this program. And so it gets back to what I was saying before about there hadn't been guidance, but we already had an organization, and I'll go a little bit into it, that were doing industrial-based assessments in the cyber realm against the terms and conditions and clauses related to cybersecurity. And that was DCMA. And they're still involved and have been involved in the process. And so you see this joint surveillance program, which essentially brings these two entities together in the review process, the accreditation body and their providers, their assessors, as well as the DoD and this DIB-CAC. So that's very interesting. I can go into more on this joint surveillance program, or a little bit more. There's not a lot out there if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. But one thing you mentioned is that we're, the interim, that voluntary period started on the 22nd. So we are now, officially in it, at least for a couple of days already. So how is this going to work in the voluntary section? And, how can a company benefit by raising their hand and saying, hey, sign me up for those voluntary assessments? And, even though the rule hasn't officially gone in place until next year, what's the benefit of being kind of the first into the gates?
Absolutely. Great question, because I know at least the companies that we're serving at Project Spectrum, a lot of times small, time constrained, look, I'm only doing what I got to do.
Right.
Kind of thing, are asking that question to themselves categorically across the board. So the joint surveillance program did start. I did confirm that with the DoD with at least one assessment scheduled for, I think, maybe next week, maybe this week, one of those days, maybe more, but it did start. And so what it does, it allows for a third-party assessor, so the certifying assessor, to conduct an examination. So this is now, again, done voluntarily. Company raises its hand and say, hey, I want to do this. And then they report those results to the Defense Contract Management Agency, DCMA, essentially the DIB-CAC. So the DCMA's Defense Industrial Base Cyber Security Assessment Center, known as DIB-CAC, for final approval. So what you essentially have is the third-party assessor and the government having blessed the system at whatever level you're looking for early. And so the key piece is then those results can be converted into a 3-year CMMC certification when rulemaking goes into effect. So essentially, you can kind of do the work early before it's a requirement and not be racing a clock. Essentially, I know for a fact that there have been resources specifically carved out for this. So DCMA has a pool of a workforce pool, over 100 folks have been hired, and they're going to be dedicating resources, and I'm sure resources that will be happy to work with folks while they're not under the gun, as opposed to when it's official and we kind of have to roll through it to get through. So I'd say probably time wise, you're going to be in a much better position to go ahead and do this now. And the government and the AB are going to be really considering you partners, right, when you come into the voluntary program, because you're going to be kind of setting the stage for how it goes in the future. And most importantly, you can be done. You can essentially, at the day that rulemaking goes into effect, your results have been approved, have the certification. So that is the kind of the benefit of the program.
Right. So obviously, one of those, get it done early, so then you're not scrambling trying to fit this all together and make sure that it works. You've got time to actually think about it and do it right the first time. The old adage of measure twice, cut once, at this point is what you're
Absolutely.
getting at.
Absolutely.
So outside of what's at DCMA with the resources there and people and employees there to help, this is not going to be a cheap endeavor for anyone. There's a lot involved between assessments and presumably, remediation. No one's going to be doing it perfect right away. So it's going to be costly, especially for small businesses. Is there anything in place? Is the government looking at this going, yeah, we know it's going to be painful, here's something to help you out, to go ahead and get you across the finish line? Because obviously it's beneficial for the government to be able to maintain, some levels of security involved with this. It also benefits them that they're able to get people to actually do this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question. And I'm sure one that, those who are out here in the trenches needing to get this done and want to know. So yes, there are multiple avenues. And so I like to talk through the structure of the government a little bit sometimes. It reminds me of some of the conversations that are going on right now about something we all kind of would be familiar with, like the infrastructure bill. So we're all citizens and we're all taxpayer dollar. We all have taxpayer dollars going into the government apparatus for our elected officials to help figure out how to get used. And we see something like the infrastructure bill come out. And the question is, how will those dollars be distributed for actual placing on contract? And so there's something that even recently came out talking about the state having deployed more dollars to small businesses, for example, than previous times. So similar to how this works with the executive office is creating kind of, hey, giving the direction, approving the direction of where projects should go. The legislative branch, of course, approving the actual law and the dollars associated with it as a part of appropriations. And then those who are charged with going to put things on contract. In this case, you really have the Office of Secretary of Defense, and we were having a conversation before the webinar started. DoD, of course, in this space, as it relates to security and national security and the national security apparatus, of which multiple elements of the government are a part of, is really kind of out in the forefront, right there. And they have to be a lot of times, and is known to go above and beyond sometimes that other civilian agencies may not have to go to, because they are protecting our warfighters, they are protecting our interests, our technology, our technological advantage across the globe. And so a lot of times the other agencies, whether national security or civilian based, will see and be able to use the blueprint that DoD puts out. And so I would expect that that would be the case, because we know today that we have breaches that happen all across the federal government and in our own personal lives, whether it's Target or the Colonial Pipeline, the oil pipeline, it happens everywhere. And folks would be shocked how much of that sometimes goes back to the government having put into place through its security apparatus, kind of evaluation, assessment, and remediation kind of techniques through places like you guys, right? Managed security service providers and others, right? And that's why I talked about the government has its place, but it works through the providers, right? The folks who are boots on the ground. So DCMA and this DIBCAC is a big part of how small businesses and just businesses in general, but definitely small businesses or those who need help, how they have been able to provide guidance to companies and entities across the government, across the industrial base who can help. And so I want to talk just a little bit about how DCMA works, their role and their oversight. And then, of course, some examples. I would say you and I both are examples. Definitely Project Spectrum is an example. Originally stood up by DoD specifically for small businesses to kind of demystify this whole thing. What's happening? What is the CMMC? How is it still 800-171? How is it not? Will there be reciprocity with other processes like security clearance processes, ISO, what have you? All those questions, some of them still outstanding, but to help walk through it. And those who've been on the ground and boots on the ground, like you guys, walking customers through the process, looking at their networks, making recommendations. And a big part of that, of course, is the manufacturing extension partnership, because manufacturing is so specifically such a hard problem there because of industrial controls being different a lot of times than other networks. So the DIBCAC put out assessment guidance, and that's kind of their purpose. And so I'm going to share screen again. They put out assessment guidance early on. So in the first version, CMMC 1.0, there was a piece that talked very specifically about the DCMA assessment methodology. And so essentially, this is now the official DoD saying, if you run the assessment this way or look at these things, and there were literally a checklist of a lot of things that add up to 110 as it relates to 800-171, and follow kind of the blueprint that we're giving you, you would have done a correct self-assessment, right? So the DIBCAC is a part of the DCMA, or Defense Contract Management Office, as you see here, part of OSD, or Office of Secretary of Defense Acquisition Apparatus. And the DIBCAC is aligned with the general goal of the DCMA to review contracts and all things related, but they are specifically here related to the requirement to protect, control unclassified information, and the scheduling, coordination of the strategic assessments of the 800-171. They are a center of excellence in certifying entities. They have assessor teams. They've been doing this for a long time. They're looking at reciprocity, as I mentioned. They are informing the procuring activities for what needs to happen, and informing the risk score mechanism. So they're pretty important. And so what you'll see in this next slide here is these are the oversight roles. So down at the bottom of the slide here, we are talking about the CMMC roles. So the accreditation body roles, C3PAO, like we talked about, third-party assessors, licensed partner publishers of training materials, LTPs, licensed training provider, exam folks, all these roles here. But at the top, of course, are these oversight roles. And so you have the CMMC as a nonprofit sitting here, and the DIBCAC. And so what you see here is, this is the, as of 2.0, CMMC 2.0. The DIBCAC conducts the CMMC level 2 assessments on the C3PAOs themselves. And as we just talked about in the Joint Surveillance Program, those C3PAOs are submitting their examinations to the DIBCAC for approval, so that you can then have your full approval upon the rulemaking completion. They're advising the program office, and they conduct the CMMC level 3 assessments. So, and that's kind of a change. So that was not going to be the case before. It was all CMMC, right? Ecosystem. The government has said, you know what, we think we need to be at the highest level, right? So this is what would have been level 5 was now level 3. The gravest kind of impact to the industrial base national security, they're going to conduct those. And so what they also, though, have done is provided a lot of that assessment knowledge and expertise to those out in the community working, because it's a government again. So they're not competing, they're not getting paid directly. They're happy to share some of their methodology, some of their tools. And so one of the things, for example, that I know many people have implemented is assessment tools that allow companies to go through that are based off of the DIBCAC's methodology and some of the tools that they had been using. So Project Spectrum, for example, implements the rubric that DCMA DibCAC gave us way early on. And there's a tool there where you can go through and it will absolutely generate the score if you answer those questions how you're supposed to. So now the problem has been for small businesses, in particular, manufacturing in some cases, and just in general, answering those questions are not easy. So they've commissioned, the department has commissioned folks like Project Spectrum, folks like Summit Business Tech to help walk through, right, those assessments, to help review a company's network. And in some of these cases, it's fairly low cost. It's already underwritten by the government. I know that you guys participate in the Defense Cybersecurity Assurance Program. Things of those nature have been out there. So you have manufacturing institutes that are providing resources. You have elements in all of the services that are providing resources, help, providing office hours. You have Project Spectrum. You have the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, the Office of Secretary of Defense, small business offices, procurement technical assistance centers, or PTACs. And of course, we are all working with the larger apparatus. So Commerce has offices that are doing work, definitely the small business development centers in the under the SBA, working with all the folks that are out here as boots on the ground to help, like we talked about, taking the guidance that the government is giving us and making it usable, making it digestible. That is how we are staying, abreast of this thing, how we're staying ahead of this thing. And we are constantly in contact with the government, particularly the DibCAC is helping out with assessment kind of methodology. They were willing to come out, give trainings. They were willing to give us updates when they were doing the assessments on how that was going. And there are organizations that have folks who are willing to share that information, which has been very, very valuable. So we're all out here in the trenches, and definitely Project Spectrum is specifically designed for small businesses to get them started with what do they need to know education-wise, what do they need to know policy-wise, what tools they need to be using, and to run through that assessment.
Great, great. So there's one last thing, and then what I'd like to do is open up to those in attendance. We've gone over a ton of information this morning, so I'm sure people are going to have some questions either from your presentation or just they've come with something that they want to bring up. So you touched on a lot of the education available. You touched on the resources available, like Summit Business Technology, who is currently an RPO, and we are a pending C3 PAO for the future as well. So we're very well versed in both how to go ahead and remediate, and then also what is, hopefully coming down the pipe. We'll be able to advise people looking to get towards that CMMC 2.0. So, with small businesses, you mentioned DCAP. Are there any other funding items out there for people to go ahead and tap into grant funding to make it a little less painful?
That's a great question. Of course, that's always top of mind as well for those who are out here.
Always.
And there's not really a great answer. Like, I like to be transparent about that. I actually like to get the question about cost. I get it from the government side. How much is this really costing people? And then I get it, of course, from the company side saying this is costing too much. Essentially, what I want to be very transparent about is the conversation is ongoing, and the Office of Small Business Programs is at the forefront of carving out ways to be helpful. There are some programs like the Mentor Protege program that has a provision that allows for direct support through its technical assistance, its technical development assistance, when you actually have an agreement that will allow for you to be able to get, for example, direct advising to look at your network through the Project Spectrum pilot that is running there. Mentor Protege program is mentioned fairly extensively in the current language coming out for the authorization and appropriations for next year. It seems like it may get more money, and very specifically cyber, supply chain, even foreign investment risk are mentioned there. So I say look out for that. I know the Office of Small Business Programs is looking at expanding ways to provide resources through universities. And so that would be, again, paid for by the department, just like the mentor protege resources. If you can get into the program, and you can go to the Office of Small Business Programs, businessdefense.gov, and learn more there. That program itself provides resources that are essentially grant money. The university-based program working through the centers of excellence and the cybersecurity centers will also be fashioned, I would imagine, similar to that, where the government is essentially paying for those resources through grant monies. And so those things are all being explored. Make sure all public comments are put in related to that. There's no other silver bullet that I can give you, or that I know about rather, that's coming down the pipe for payment. But I would definitely say take advantage of the programs like the DCAP that you mentioned, the Cybersecurity Assistance Program, Project Spectrum, the institutes, and look out for the academia programs that are coming down the pipe.
Great, excellent.
Here's a question for you, Melinda.
Yeah.
Are we expecting or anticipating any timeline shifts?
This is what I would say, and I had very direct conversations with the senior executives that literally run this recently, like in the last few hours. I would, as a prior government official, not ever be surprised if there are delays. However, as Ken alluded to, I do not expect for this to go away, right? And so while there may be some shifts, some of these things in that timeline that I mentioned don't really have don't have deadlines associated with them. So like the review, when the DoD submits to the Office of Management and Budget and those in the White House for the actual publishing, that is indeterminate, right? How long that would take. So that could add some time. But what I would say is expect the CMMC to be here to stay in some form, and kind of let the government apparatus run as it runs.
Okay.
Any other questions that we have coming in, Kim?
Yeah, here's another one. If I'm looking to get started, where can I find out more information on changes to CMMC and support needs? Is there anything out there that's like a trusted resource? Because there's tons of people who have an opinion or a thought or whatever. Is there a place to get like, this is the answer, this is the Bible, this is where it comes from?
Yes.
What would you suggest?
Yeah, well, the first place is the DoD, right? So when the DoD unveiled the 2.0, they set up a website, www.acq.osd.mil /CMMC. So I showed a little bit of the org chart. So this all ends up falling in the acquisition realm, as well as now the Office of the Chief Information Office, so CIO. But that site is the official site for what's happening there. So if you're going to go there today, and you could actually kind of Google DoD CMMC and you'd come up with it, but it is going to talk very specifically about the change from 1.0 to 2.0. Is going to talk about what they're doing related to international companies being able to get certified. Kind of gnarly issues is going to be very transparent there. That's the first place. But then, of course, there is the CMMC AB or the Cyber AB, which is cyberab.org. They're going to have updated material. And then definitely Project Spectrum is always going to be posting, and there are various different kind of news sources. So, but I would definitely bookmark the DoD. So that's https www.acq.osd.mil /CMMC, or Google DoD CMMC. And that one should be always kind of a reference point.
Great, excellent, thank you. Thanks for that. So another one that came in, is there anything that Project Spectrum has or able to stand up kind of a compliant enclave for small businesses, so the easy button can be pushed by small businesses? Is that even something that's possible to do?
It is. So essentially, we're talking like a toolkit where you can at least know if I have this kind of suite, I will get this level of kind of compliance. So compliance, as you well know, is a moving target. You are always having to stay up to date. It is very, very dependent on a company's systems, their applications. And so we are never going to be able to have kind of a one-stop-shop solution for everyone in any case, right? But certainly Project Spectrum is working to build out low-cost tools, to build out information that would say, hey, we recommend for your kind of setup application and where you sit, what you have access to have these types of tools, these types of supports. So it may be a managed service, it may be a managed security service provider, if depending on kind of the application, and recommend for you to look at these options, right? That is what we can do. So we can do that today for the Mentor Protege program and proteges, because we're commissioned to do that on behalf of the Office of Small Business Programs and MPP program. We're looking to expand those resources, and we're looking to have a more automated approach. So similar to what you have now with the ecosystem of this CMMC, the marketplace, where you can go and kind of pick through, like you just mentioned, you guys are RPO, or registered practitioner organization, and likely to soon be a third-party assessor. There are these kind of lists of folks that you can choose from. We're looking to put together similar, not as it relates to assessing, but as it relates to tools, a similar package of here's a list. So if you go onto the Project Spectrum site today, there are tool reviews, useful tools, and you can individually look at types of tools, anything from open source, operating system, firewalls, all the way to SIEMs, like everything in between, and you can compare those. But we'll do a more packaged approach as we get the request for and kind of get to that place where we can do that. Definitely, as it is of interest to the community.
So it sounds like, to an extent, there are some tool kits that can be put in place, but as you mentioned, compliance, CMMC, this is not going to be a one size fits all at all. There's going to be intricacies to every company out there. So it really kind of boils down to get a readiness assessment, work with someone who knows it, knows the standards, knows 800-171, the kind of building blocks of CMMC, and now CMMC 2.0. Work with someone who knows what they're doing and design a system that is going to, meet those requirements, be able to move forward as the maturity model, of course, matures and gets updated throughout the years. And then, actually is designed for your company and what you utilize on a day-to-day basis, because everyone's going to be different.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with you there.
Great. Well, excellent. Well, Kim, are there any other questions that have come in at this point in time?
I have not received any other questions, no.
Great. Okay. Well, all right. Well, with that being said, obviously this is, this webinar. Melinda, thank you so much for giving us some updates on everything that has been coming through as of late, and, kind of a little bit insight into what may be coming down the pike in the near future. This is a snapshot in time, so we do want to go ahead and kind of put that caveat on there of some of this information may change. So obviously, if you are looking for updates, come to Project Spectrum, come to Summit Business Technologies. Both of us are here as resources who can help you understand the changes and the standard itself and help you prepare for that necessary assessment. Do want to thank everyone for attending today. This webinar has been recorded, so we'll go ahead and post it online for future reference. And if there are any questions that you think of later on, feel free to reach out to us here. We'd be happy to discuss those questions with you and hopefully get some answers for you if there are answers available. Again, Melinda, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually was remiss. I wanted to show a couple things on the site. It'll take 30 seconds if I have
Yeah,
time.
I think we have a couple minutes left here, so that would be great.
Let's do that. Let's do that. So I mentioned the site Project Spectrum multiple times, but I didn't actually say the the URL. So just really quick, Project Spectrum, talk about what it is, and these are kind of the components we've already talked through. But the website www.projectspectrum.io. Go there. That's where all the resources are. We talked about the DIBCAC assessment. So we have a self-assessment tool, a readiness check assessment tool that is compliant with the DIBCAC's approach or the GCMA's approach, partnering with all the departments. And what I really want to kind of quickly get to is mentor protege, we mentioned manufacturing extension program. So there is a feature on the site. We partner with the manufacturing extension partnership, started with the national level, which of course is run out of Commerce NIST office. And so there's a resource that particularly for manufacturers that brings those two things together. So you go into the site, you go to partners, and you select MEP. And there again are a couple other things there, including the pilot to take a look at. But specifically, you log in and you get access to specific material that has been curated for manufacturers in conjunction with the MEP. And then this button here in the middle on the page, which I love to reference, and Ken, we talked a little bit about this. Once you walk through essentially this kind of self-help, self-driven approach to kind of do your homework, you can hit the button in the middle and pop up a window, say where you are, and bring up the relevant MEP office. And those guys may also work, for example, in Maryland, like with Ken in the summit, and get you connected that way. So a couple ways to be able to connect to resources directly on Project Spectrum. That was the main thing I wanted to hit upon. And of course, you can get to us by these types of webinars, projectspectrum.io, outreach@projectspectrum.io is the email address. And we're of course on social. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. Well, everyone, once again, I want to thank you for your time. We'll be posting this webinar on our website as well for future. And once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope this has been informative. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.